Hi, I'm Miles, and this is Auto-Minded. A first-generation Mustang like this, when it first hit the streets, it really created a revolution. In fact, that's why we call the whole segment it created pony cars. And while the competition was working on their own versions, well, you have to understand your enemy before you imitate it. And that means opposition research, and that's exactly what we got here. This is GM's Fisher Body Division, and it's the report for the 1964.5 Ford Mustang. It even says master right here. And what that tells you is this is the report for the first Mustang. And we're going to get into the details that make this cool in just a minute, but it's also good to acknowledge that this isn't the exact right home because we're in the NPD collection. And if you know anything about National Parts Depot, you know they show a lot of love to Ford and a lot of love to General Motors. And that's all in this file right here. It's Ford and GM. But even when something like this gets in the right hands, well, sometimes that's just luck.
My dad and I were, as we typically always were for many, many years in a row, my dad and I always frequented and went to the annual Hershey swap meet in October. And we were at Hershey, walking through the swap meet, and we were browsing through a tent that was all General Motors stuff. And I just remember used parts, a little bit of NOS stuff. The guy had some literature. And then just sitting on top of the table, I look down and I see 1964 Ford Mustang. And then I see this date, 4/15/64. And then very quickly I realize that at the top of the book, or the binder, it says Fisher Body, Engineering Division. So I kind of eyeball the guy and ask if he doesn't mind if I flip through it. And I start flipping through it. I didn't spend a half hour there reading through the whole entire thing. As soon as I got in here and I saw hand-drawn sketch engineering drawings and pictures of what would have been a pre-417, Mustang Day Mustang in the hands of the enemy, in the hands of General Motors prior to the release date, it just really blew my mind. I was like, wow, this is something. And then the cover of the other one said master on it. So without reading through everything, I just simply inquired how much for the set. And I'm not shy about saying what I paid for it, $100 for this piece of history. I took it home with me with all the other parts and gear and usual swap meet stuff that Dad and I accumulate when we used to go. And quite honestly, I threw it into a file with a bunch of other interesting stuff. My dad and I have a fairly extensive collection of literature and documents and manuals. And there it sat buried for years until finally I pulled it out earlier this year, and I thought to myself, I need to share this and I need to know more about it myself. And so that's where we are today, but really it was just a swap meet find. Some GM guy who must have had a father or an uncle who worked for Fisher Body wound up with this stuff and just put it out on a table in a swap meet. And that's how it fell into my hands.
And you really can get a lot of entertainment for your $100 in this one, because any enthusiast will enjoy just reading some of the handwritten side notes or what isn't in the file, because there is no mention of F-Body because Fisher wasn't even up to the Camaro or the Firebird yet. They were just trying to understand the new coupe from Ford. And in fact, probably one of the best things in here and one of the coolest mysteries has to do with the pictures. These are the first photos that are in the file, and well, we'll call these the glamour shots because it looks really good here and it almost looks like it could be a marketing photo, except you don't really find this one out on Google, and in fact, the Henry Ford doesn't even really have this in their files either. General Motors Heritage Collection, well, somebody there did recognize in the background as the tech center, so let's just go with that. Now, each one of these photos has a serial number on it from General Motors, and this next set, well, it's a much later serial number, but it's a white Mustang and it's definitely in their shops and it's even getting torn down. So they're tearing down that same white Mustang, right? Maybe not quite. Take a look at that shot again. There is no side mirror. It was only optional in 1964, and well, this car really just doesn't have any options. It's a 6-cylinder model and it doesn't even have the backup lights. Now when you look at the one in the shop, all those options are still there. So we have two different cars, but hold on to that idea for a moment as we actually also look at the timeline because, well, we know Ford started the Mustang production in early March 1964, and they did that because they wanted to make sure that pretty much every dealer at least had one on hand when Mustang Day came around on April 17th, 1964. Well, the pictures, those glamour shots, they're dated April 13th, 1964. The only other significant part of that date is that is the press debut of the Mustang. So what's really going on here? I mean, Are the dates just unreliable on the pictures? Or did GM maybe get their car a little bit early? I mean, after all, the first Ford Mustang was actually sold on April 14th because one of the dealers accidentally let it go. Maybe that happened. Or maybe, let's really have some fun with this idea. Maybe General Motors didn't just get it days early, maybe they got it weeks early, maybe they got way too early. You know, the Mustang was in production since March. Maybe one of those cars that was at the dealer, maybe it was just under a tarp and it was supposed to be sitting there waiting, but it got snuck out for an afternoon before going back under the cover. Or maybe one of the distributors, maybe it was on the truck and it got lost for a little while to get those photos. So, later on when it was time for General Motors to actually buy one, they bought one as close as they could to those early photos, that way they could cover for that friend that did them the favor. And just to make sure that everything was okay, they also slapped the same April 13th date, the first date anybody was supposed to see the Mustang, right into everything. Sounds far-fetched? Yeah, but conspiracy is often a hell of a lot more fun than reality. And well, quite frankly, that's all the fun about being an enthusiast. And that's also where you come in, because if you've seen anything in these files or if something's triggered the memory, why don't you put something in the comments? Because as you heard Rick, he wants to hear as much of the story as possible. So let's really get this one told and get it complete. Have a whole bunch of fun. Thank you for watching.